In this video, we're going to be taking a look at decimal multiplication. Now, the essential question that we're going to be looking at on page 183 is how can you use a model to multiply decimals? So you will need your Go Math book out, your pencil, and also your math journal. Now, to investigate the problem there, you're going to need actually colored pencils for this. Okay, so 2 different colored pencils is what you will need. And reading the problem, says the distance from Charlene's house to her school is 8/10 of a mile. Charlene rides her bike 7/10 of the distance and walks the rest of the way. How far does Charlene ride her bike to school? Now, the first thing you will need to do on the right-hand side is to draw a square with 10 equal columns. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 columns of 10 in each column there, just like I have right here on the right-hand side. Okay, now what decimal value does each column represent? So what decimal value does this column represent? And that would actually be 1/10. Okay, is what that would represent. Let me just erase that. Okay, now letter B, after we've drawn this, shade columns on the grid to represent the total distance to Charlene's school. The total distance to the school is 8/10 of a mile. Okay, so since this is 8/10 of a mile, what we will do, we'll just color in 8 of these. So one, I'm gonna use a different color ink actually. It's a little smaller here. So 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, and I want you to do this in your Go Math book as well. 6/10, 7/10, and 8/10. Okay. Now we can see how many columns here did we shade in. Pretty easy there. We shaded in 8 columns. Now what we want to do, we want to divide the square into 10 equal rows. So we have columns going down, and then we want to do 10 equal rows going across. So here's what we will do. We'll use black ink for this, and we want to just go 10 rows going across. 1. It's another row here. Another row. So we'll keep doing this until we get to the very bottom. Okay, so we have something looking just like that. I know it's not beautiful, but it will work for now. Okay, now it is important to know that it says divide the square into 10 equal rows. We did that. What decimal value does each row represent? So this represents, each row represents 1/10. 0.1, and let's write that down. Okay, I moved on to the next slide, so my square looks a little bit different than my beautiful one from the previous one. So it says use a different color, shade rows that overlap the shaded columns to represent the distance to school that Charlene rides her bike. Okay, so what we do is we have all of our shaded row, for example. Okay, so each shaded row. Now we know that she went 7/10. So what I am going to do, I'm just going to color over 7 of my rows. So 1, 2 of my shaded area of those rows, I should say. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, now, and that will look just like this. Okay, so 7 rows. Now, we know that we shaded this in because it was 7/10. Did not write that in there for 7, or for letter D. Okay, how many rows of the shaded columns did we shade? We shaded in 7 of these. Why 7? Because 7/10. All right, now we can see that there's 8 rows. Okay, I'm sorry, 8 in each row of our 7. Okay, so for a total of 56 squares that are shaded in 2 times. So 56 squares. Each square, it's important to know that each square does represent 1/100th. Okay? Why 1/100th? Because it's in a 100 grid, so each little square you can see represents 1/100th. All right, now based upon this, we can see that 7/10 times 8/10 is 56 hundredths. Why 56 hundredths? How do we know that? Because we have 56 squares that were shaded in 2 times. So we know, based upon this model, that Charlene rides her bike for 56 hundredths of a mile. Okay, now I know we have some explanation parts there on page 184. It says, explain how dividing the decimal square into 10 columns and rows show that tenths multiplied by tenths is equal to hundredths. Okay, for example, columns of 10 and rows of 10. The columns and rows each represent a tenth. Okay, we can see that. The small squares created by the overlapping rows and columns show hundredths. These small little squares, and represent the product of a tenth multiplied by a tenth. Okay, now the next one, why is the part of the model representing the product less than either factor? Okay, now it's important to know this, that both decimal factors are less than 1, so you're finding a part of a part. Okay, so in other words, we're trying to figure out what is 7/10 of 8/10. Okay, so the product will always be less than 1 and less than both factors. Okay, let's take a look at on page 184, the making connections section. Okay, so it says you can use decimal squares to multiply decimals greater than 1. Okay, now what we have here is 3/10 times 1 4/10. So the first thing we're going to do is shade columns to represent 1 4/10. So what we will do, we will shade one hole, and I want you to do that. So one total hole here, representing the 1, and then 4 representing of the other one, representing 4/10. So 1 4/10. So answering the question, how many tenths are there in 1 4/10, we have 14. Okay, 14 columns here. Now what we need to do, shade rows that overlap the shaded columns to represent 3/10. Now what we need to do is we need to take these sections now and just draw lines going all the way across this here. And I want you to draw them going all the way across this section, okay, going all the way down. Okay, now that we have our lines drawn here, what we're going to do is just take 3 of these sections here and shade them in. Why 3? Because it's multiplied by 3/10. Okay, so let's take one section, it's a little smaller here, 2 sections, and 3 sections. Okay, now we know that there are 10 per row going across, and then we can see that there are a total of 4 going across per row here. So we have 30 on this side, and a total of 4, 8, 12 on this side. We add those two together, that's going to give us 42. Okay, so we had 3 rows. Okay, now we need to count the number of squares just like we did, and we can record the product on the line. So we have 3/10 times 1 4/10. We have 42 hundredths. Now remember, what they are asking us is really, what is 3/10 of 1 4/10? So that's why that factor is less than both shouldn't say both, but less than even the 1 and 4/10. Okay, now we're taking a look at 8/10 and 4/10, and this is actually already done for you. What you need to do is just figure out what part of this section was already shaded in for what was already shaded in 2 times. Count those squares, and that is your answer. And then I want you to do 1/10 times 7/10. So do both of these, and I'll have the answers for you when you are finished. So pause the video now. Okay, we have 32 hundredths and 7 hundredths for this one. It's kind of hard to see, but I had 7 rows shaded in, representing my 7/10, and then I had 1 row across representing my 1/10 of this, and a total of 7 squares for 7 hundredths. Now I want you to try these two at your seat. When you're finished, you can press play, and I will have the answers for you. So pause the video now. Okay, for 0 and 4/10 times 1 and 6/10, you should have gotten 64 hundredths. And 3/10 times 4/10, you should have gotten 12/10. Okay, I want you to do these 2 problems, and when you're finished, you can press play, and I will have the answers for you. So pause the video now. Okay, you can see I have the answer of 54 hundredths. I had 9 columns shaded in, and then 6 rows within those 9 columns shaded in. We have 60 hundredths, or you can even say 6/10. We have 1 and 2/10 shaded in purple, and then 5 rows, okay, representing that 5/10, giving us a total of 60 hundredths that are shaded in blue. Okay, I want you to work through these 2 problems, and when you're finished, you can press play, and I will have the answers for you. So pause the video now. Okay, the answers we have are 72 hundredths and 75 hundredths for both of these. Okay, let's take a look at this test prep problem. I want you to work through it. When you're finished, you can press play, and I will have the answers for you. So pause the video now. Okay, the answer is letter C. How do we know that? We have 7 columns are shaded in, representing 7/10, and of those columns that are shaded in, 4 of the rows are shaded in, representing our 4/10, and then there are a total of 28 green squares that are shaded in, representing 28 hundredths. Now, wrapping up the video, let's take a look at that focus question, or the essential question. How can you use a model to multiply decimals? And you can see the answer. You can shade columns of 1 or more decimal squares with one color to represent one factor, then use another color to shade rows of the shaded columns to represent the other factor. Then you count or multiply to find how many small squares are shaded twice. So this concludes the video on decimal multiplication. If you have any questions about this concept, please come and see me.